The views expressed in the following program are those of the participants and do not necessarily reflect the views of SAUGA960 AM or its management.
Live from Toronto to the world.
Josh!
This is Josh Holiday Live. Talk that rocks.
The public needs to be informed.
Josh might surprise us.
Got an opinion? Dial 647-6YO-JOSH.
When you hear him, you're like, what?
Josh Holiday Live starts now.
Hello. 'Tis Friday, March 11th. If you're still in school, you're headed to March break this week. You also have to remember to set your clocks ahead, spring forward on Saturday night. Busy show today. We're going to speak a little bit later with Dr. Colin Furness, an infection control epidemiologist and assistant professor at the Faculty of Information at U of T. We're going to talk about the latest provincial guidelines for COVID and how they may be not quite right. But first, if you were thinking of voting for Doug Ford, this interview may give you some doubts. Carmya S'ad is with us now. She's a lawyer, activist, and political cartoonist, among many other things. She has a website called getthefordout.com, which we'll talk about in just a bit. But you were a big presence at the Freedom trucker rallies in Ottawa. A lot of people were using your video footage and coming to you because you were pretty much embedded with the kooks. What did you take away from your experience there?
Yeah. One thing that I feel hasn't gotten enough airtime is the role of the province. And in the weeks following the rally, we learned, for example, that members of the Ottawa Police Board, who happened to be Ford appointees, resigned, and that one of them appeared to actually be attending the protest. And so this sheds some light, although really it raises more questions about the role of the province in allowing the situation to get to the point that it did. And I hope that that's something that comes out in the inquiry.
Yeah, as do I. And I don't think that was the only person connected with Ford who came out as in support of the rally. Once the fundraising list came out, there were some connections there as well.
And we know that his daughter was on Instagram encouraging people to bring barrels of fuel and overwhelm police, kind of just suggestions really on how to get around the rules in place to prevent this from growing. And so the connections run deep, wide. There's more that we don't know than that we do.
And I still find that frustrating. It's only probably within the last couple of months that the press has brought up the Doug Ford daughter connection. It's been pretty widely known by a lot of people who are in the know that she's rabidly anti-vax, anti-mask, and just not the brightest bulb. And she's been spreading a lot of misinformation. And Doug's only alluded to it, but I kind of wish he would go full out and denounce her crazy views.
Yeah, there's this prevailing sense of family is off limits for politicians, and generally for good reason, because, we don't want people dissuaded from taking public office because they're afraid of their families being attacked. But I think what's different here is, Ford himself has indicated that he talks to his family about policy. He's joked about them lobbying him for certain things. And B, her messaging is so contrary to what is being put out there and by the government. And she herself, has made public appearances on her maiden name. And so I think that makes it fair game. And I agree with you that while we can't hold Doug Ford responsible for what his adult daughter decides to do or say, at the very least, it would be expected to have some kind of denunciation or distancing from those views, because otherwise I think he's going to be perceived as fence sitting. And this is a way to kind of drag on or maintain a relationship with a base that has otherwise rejected him, but is a fan of his daughter, or it puts into question where his decision making is coming from. And certainly some recent announcements, it doesn't appear to be science based.
No, it felt every time there was something that should have been done, it happened after public pressure and a couple of weeks, if not months, too late. And whenever that happened, I thought, oh, well, maybe he's sort of trying to appease his daughter. Then reluctantly, he's like, well, I guess I have to do this because most people want it. He always seems to be reluctantly dragged along rather than leading, especially on COVID.
I can't disagree with that assessment. Leadership has been in short supply in Ontario.
And let's we know an election is coming soon because there were all kinds of taxpayer-funded ads about how great Ontario is doing economically, just coincidentally, coming out this time on the internet, on radio, on TV. I imagine there was a huge media buy by us taxpayers to pay to shine the turd, as it were. And there's all kinds of other announcements coming out today. He announced some hospital plan, and it's that time of year where it feels like Dougie is pandering to try and get some votes on his side.
It's election season, and it's very cynical, I think, and just I hope that Ontarians, have a broader vision and memory than the next few months, because we're going to see the weather improve. We're going to see sort of fun summertime activities, maybe unhindered by masks, because there are lagging indicators that, we just will have to wait and see what happens. But it's been a very rough 4 years, whatever the economic indicators say. On an anecdotal level, I think life is getting harder and more expensive for most people. And I hope that and focusing on policy issues is what people bring to the polls with them in June. So
I think it might be important here to talk about things other than the pandemic, because a lot of his leadership gets lost in how he handled the pandemic for good or bad. My feeling is mostly bad, though early on people were kind of cheerleading him. But there's a lot of things that were happening outside of the pandemic that were kind of shady, kind of bad. Can we maybe go through some of those things?
Yeah. Where to begin?
Yeah, exactly.
Actually, shameless self-plug. I have an activity book on my website that kind of outlines a couple of major cuts, missteps, just shady things in the background. And
so let's plug the website. Is it getthefordout.com?
That's going to lead you to the same place.
Okay.
So if you look at the top, you'll find it. It's the Ford Failed Ontario Activity Book.
Okay.
And one page is dedicated to MZOs. And I think that this, I hope it doesn't get lost in the shuffle. But deals, or what appear to be backroom deals, guiding the Ford administration to override local planning authorities and sort of force through construction in ecologically sensitive areas, just total disregard for actually preserving Ontario for its residents.
And to a certain degree, the heritage as well. I remember there was that big old industrial type building that they started destroying without a lot of consultation. And as a fan of that kind of architecture, the urban architecture, I was really disappointed when they started tearing it down and then they were stopped for a while. It just feels like he's not so much for the people as he is for the people who are developers.
Absolutely. It feels like it's, things are being plundered right from under us. And, it's going to take time to repair if there are things that are even repairable. So that's one thing, right? Favoring his donors. The lack of transparency, that bleeds into a lot of what the Ford administration has done over the years. Before the pandemic, there were wide-scale teacher strikes and sort of the decimation of our education system under a minister who prefers to do photo ops literally anywhere else but schools. That's happening in the background. There's been a lot of legislation, I think, that and this is, it may not make front page headlines, but Ford has gone to court and lost in court on a number of matters where it's just, why is this even being litigated? And on one occasion, at least, where he did end up losing, he invoked the notwithstanding clause, which is essentially a constitutional override to our charter rights and freedoms. And this is with respect to advertising and the way that third-party groups can do campaigning for the provincial election. So he rammed through this law after losing in court in a way that's blatantly recognizing that it's unconstitutional. And it was headlines for a few days. And then, we have this really rapid news cycle, and I think has been lost. And there's sort of an irony just going back to, the Freedom Convoy, the Freedom Fighters, this didn't seem to gain very much traction or interest when it's a blatant, in-your-face violation of fundamental rights and freedoms.
Well, I think there was no... when you look at the truckers, I don't think that's what they were really after. I think they were just... It was a lot of white supremacists, white nationalists, co-opting some vague messaging about our freedoms, and essentially the core wanted to overthrow the government via unconstitutional means. So it's kind of hypocritical for them to claim they want their constitutional rights. Mm-hmm. And there's other stuff too. I think you mentioned the shortness of the news cycle for a lot of these things, and a lot of it gets whitewashed by the pandemic, because the pandemic has taken up a ton of news space. And you mentioned the education cuts were on the horizon, and I think even healthcare cuts were going to come if not for COVID coming first. Do you know anything about healthcare cuts?
I know that, there were cuts being made pre-pandemic, which came back to really bite us in the butt. I know that anesthesia, I think, for colonoscopies was one of the very first cuts that Doug Ford made upon taking office. And that just, troubling foreshadowing of what was to come, perhaps. And the privatization of healthcare, I think, is something else that we really need to be on the alert for. And we've seen hints of privatization in the COVID response, in the way that lobbyists appeared to make inroads with the government. And we relied very heavily on the private sector to kind of have tests accessible, give the shots, etc. And, now with... we need to be on guard, I think, for a two-tiered system where so much has been depleted from the public sector that things are not working as they should. And that then is used as kind of an entryway to have like a pay to play healthcare. So I think that is, and just the way as well, and sort of jump around on this, there's just so much. but nurses and the way that nurses have been treated and dealt with, and the attrition rate because of legislation that caps their salaries and affects their ability to take sick days, etc. And now this announcement of $5,000 for nurses, which very suspect timing and doesn't actually address the concerns that have been raised all along. There's different forms of attack, I think, on our healthcare with a view towards setting up a system that has privatized elements to it. And just looking south of the border, it blows my mind that is something a leader could think is good for the people. Right. And it might be good for some people's profits. But I don't think that attacks on universal healthcare are where we should go. And so this is going to be an important election.
Yeah, it's so weird that the States seems to be the worst example of medicine in the world in terms of it being available to everybody. And our system and in Europe, those systems all are looked at as, well, those are actually pretty good systems. So the fact that someone would want to go to a system that is widely derided and widely shown not to work for all people is really kind of scary. And the other thing, you mentioned the $5,000 to nurses. I mean, it really just looks like a pre-election bribe, thinly veiled. And I've seen a lot of talk of some of these nurses saying, well, we'll stick around, we'll get that $5,000 and then we're getting out. It's not a long-term solution. It's just kind of like here's the money, be quiet. And we also mentioned sick leave, and that's another thing that Doug Ford was really bad on and late at delivering on throughout the pandemic, not just for nurses, but for everybody, when it was a real need during the pandemic for people to have paid sick leave. Otherwise, they would have to work to make money and spread the disease. The other thing we can talk about a little bit is childcare, and how I think we're the last, or one of the very last provinces that doesn't have $10 a day childcare because Ford just doesn't seem to want to get it done.
It is, I think the pattern, right, is disregard for children, disregard for the elderly. And that's just looking at ageism purely, right, to marginalized segments of society. And yes, why hasn't the province prioritized getting to the table with the federal government? This flimsy idea of we're arguing for a better deal for Ontarians, I just don't buy it. And, another thing that just came to mind as we were speaking, legislation that effectively is going to try to shield long-term care homes from liability for negligence that occurred during sort of the early stages of the pandemic, was an ongoing issue. And it hinges on whether they attempted to make good faith efforts or something along those lines, like a very low threshold. And we'll see, right? Because there's going to be cases that are argued about this regardless. But just, again, not actually centering the needs of people and operating in a way that almost deliberately is going to cause the most havoc and chaos and problems for people who rely on government protection services. We haven't talked about ODSP and how shameful it is that there have been no increases. There's money that could or should be spent to ensure that disabled people, who are also experiencing the same cost of living increases, who have been really at a stagnant rate for quite some time. And there's not much that's being done to help. And I think it's the opposite, actually. The program was is taken over by a foreign company with a view towards reducing expenditures. So, just this really backwards approach that isn't about helping people lead better lives, living with more dignity. It's really just, it seems very driven to support his donors.
Well, and that's the thing too. It's not like the money's not there. We learned in the last couple of weeks that there's $5.5 billion of money that went unspent by this administration, and it's so hard to quantify that amount of money. Like, it's such a large number, and you think of how much good that could have done over the past few years in making the pandemic smoother, making working smoother, helping out the people of Ontario, but this money just sat there.
It's sick. It's really, really sick. And that, doesn't account as well for money wasted, right, on changing the contract for the beer store, on, stickers that won't stick and turned out to be unconstitutional to force gas stations to put them on beeping bracelets that never materialized, on license plates that weren't visible and no one really asked to be changed. Like, this is all a lot of money that didn't go towards keeping people alive, because fundamentally this is life or death, and separate from the pandemic, this is life or death. Like, people, there's someone in Toronto who froze on the streets the other night, and it's someone who I didn't live too far away from, right? And my main work is affordable housing, and I can tell you that that's something that's out of control as well, and changes to the Residential Tenancies Act actually facilitated eviction, and the tribunals were understaffed for quite some time before the pandemic, meaning that it was an absolute crisis when it actually did hit. So these are all really basic material needs that are going unmet. And, I've seen the concept of social murder applied to this administration, the idea that, these are deaths caused by deliberately poor policy, negligently poor policy. It doesn't really, either way, the result is the same. And we should be outraged. And yet, I don't think we are. Or there are moments where there's outrage and then it gets diffused over something silly. And Doug Ford is a master of this, actually. Like the strategy of dead catting, where, somehow it's leaked that he doesn't even know how to use a laptop. And that's sort of what we're talking about and joking about. And it really goes to a level of incompetence that's hard to fathom. Yeah. But it distracts from kind of other issues, or, the premier's talking to Arthur and everyone's joking that it's, Arthur the aardvark. And I have participated in that memeing as well. And it just, we really need to be focused, I think. And elections are one way to participate in civil society. I don't even know that they are the best or most effective way. And we haven't talked about what the alternatives to Doug Ford are, because really there's nothing exciting to say about that, unfortunately. But we are at a critical juncture. And, if voting isn't something that you have prioritized or thought is important, it really is. It's a big, I can't see, like, with all the damage he's done in just these past few years, it really does chill me and frighten me what would happen going forward if he was given more time to complete the destruction, as it were. I talked about this last week on the show, the trouble with our voting system in that ideally we'd have a ranked choice voting because of the way we have multiple political parties. And a recent poll came out that had the PCs ahead, but it's sort of
a little more complicated than that. They have 39% support, but then the two parties that would be considered more on the progressive side each split with 27. So there's quite a bit more people who don't want Doug Ford than those who do, and now we have to figure out, well, how do we overcome this vote splitting that happens on the left?
Yeah, that's the dilemma with first past the post. And just as an aside, another thing that Doug Ford did is, I think it was the municipality of London that decided to change its system towards ranked ballots, and he just canceled that. So, maybe there is something to the fact that would be more democratic. But one campaign, and I'm not a political scientist, but one campaign that I'm aware of is just, who's the progressive candidate in your area who's most likely to win, right? So that concept of strategic voting, and that is one sort of potential solution. And people being sort of attuned to their local polling station, because we don't actually vote for Doug Ford unless we happen to live in his riding, right? So who's most likely to win? Who's going to best represent your interests where you are at? And that's kind of on an incremental level, like the most we can do. If I were advising the opposition parties, what sort of is your messaging tailored to each riding? Are your candidates speaking on issues that are important to people in that riding? Because and part of how I think Ford is successful, and this is the same momentum that his brother ran on, Rob, when he was mayor of Toronto, there are diverging interests between people who are living in city centers and people who are living in more remote or rural areas. The interests actually may not be that different, but the way you present messaging matters. And I think that's something Ford has been able to capitalize on, and may continue to capitalize on. So just being active sort of in your local community, who's best going to speak to that, and talking to your friends, acquaintances who are Ford voters, and maybe I don't know, that might be.
It's hard to convince them.
I don't know.
I think it might be easier to just sort of ask them questions about a lot of these things. Ask them, well, what's your opinion? Why do you think he's building those highways even though no one wants them? And why is he doing all of this for developers? He says he's a man of the people, but really, he's essentially the lackey for these developers and corporations. He's a populist not working for the people, and it's hard to kind of sometimes get through to these people, because they just sort of see the populist veneer of he's a folksy guy. He's kind of he's not too I don't want to say not too bright, but he's just kind of like he's just a regular guy. He's not a politician, but it's the opposite. He's a shark.
Yeah, it's just the dilemma. That's the eternal dilemma of how do you get people to stop voting against their own interests. And I don't know that we have an answer. What I do is I try to have fun with it and just point out sort of the facts or the discrepancies, and then people can do that final step of putting it together for themselves, and they either laugh and they get it, they don't get it and they don't laugh, or but that's the medium and channel that I use, and everyone's going to have their own sort of strength. But the idea that we're separate from politics, a part of this erosion, I think, has to do with years and decades preceding Doug Ford, and just this disconnect between people who are bureaucrats and legislators and the people, and I don't blame folks for being disillusioned with the system, but everything is political in the sense that it touches all of these policies and laws. They touch every aspect of your daily life, right? Whether you think about it or not, the practical effect is it will. So it's, something to be engaged with.
That is Carmya S'ad. She is a lawyer and a political activist. It is Josh Holiday Live. You can reach us at 647-6-YO-JOSH. We are going to return in just a minute and talk to Dr. Colin Furness, an infection control epidemiologist and assistant professor at U of T, going to talk about the latest forward announcements regarding COVID. Stand by.
Hi, this is Greg Carrasco from Oakville Nissan. And during a time in which we can barely find inventory, deals are very difficult to come by. So what I'm about to tell you is super special. If you're looking at buying a used vehicle, come to Oakville Nissan and don't pay up to 6 months on approved credit. So you don't have to make a payment for up to 6 months on approved credit when you finance a used vehicle through Oakville Nissan. Something's happening here at oakvillenissan.com.
The Punjabi Community Health Services PCHS Langar on Wheels is a program aimed at providing food to frail, homebound seniors who are unable to prepare meals for themselves. Each day, we deliver fresh, hot, and nutritious meals that are familiar and comforting to a wide range of ethnicities according to the dietary needs of each person. Since 2016, PCHS has delivered nearly 200,000 meals to an average of 80 seniors per month. Too many seniors are stuck at home and out of sight. They are vulnerable to illness, weakness, and medical complications arising from hunger and poor nutrition. Now, more than ever, we need your help to expand our Langar on Wheels food delivery program. For more information and to donate, please go to our website, pchs.foundation. You can also send us an email at ceo@pchs.foundation. Our aim is a simple one, to ensure that no senior will go without food, ever.
Welcome to Sports Interaction, Canada's sports book, dedicated to giving competitive odds on the teams and sports that matter to Canadians. Hockey, football, basketball, golf, majors, whatever your sport, SIA has you covered. Get more ways to play on every sport online at Sports Interaction, including the best live in play. Canada plays at SIA. Get in the game at Sports Interaction, Canada's sports book. Brought to you by Mohawk Online in Canada. Players must be 19 years or older. Play responsibly.
No radio? No problem. Stream us live on SAUGA960am.ca.
Something bugging you? Need to vent?
Where the is Josh?
This is your unfiltered megaphone.
When you hear him, you're like, what?
Dial 647-6-YO-JOSH now to be heard. Talk that rocks. Rocks. Josh Holiday Live.
Yes, it is Josh Holiday Live, and live with us on the phone is Dr. Colin Furness, an infection control epidemiologist. I can say it, 7 syllables, and also an assistant professor at University of Toronto. Can you hear me, sir?
I sure can, yes. Hello.
Excellent. So let's get right to it. The Ford government made an announcement this week on what we're doing with the pandemic going forward. Dr. Moore made the announcement and claimed that it was the science table that was advising him, but maybe that's not the case. What have you heard?
Well, I'm not on the science table, and I don't work for government, so I think I can just say it squarely on the table. The decision that's been made is not science-based. It didn't come from the science table. I know that for a fact. It's a political decision. We have scheduled the end of the pandemic, and unfortunately, we didn't consult COVID on that. And I think that's where we're going to be in for a bit of a disappointment in the coming weeks.
And one thing you've mentioned, I've followed you on Twitter, as people should. People aren't talking about child hospitalization rates. What insight can you give on that?
It's a complicated topic. I wrote a rather urgent open letter at the very end of December saying, look, if we see child hospitalization rates here as they are starting to appear in the U.S., we're going to be overwhelmed and it's going to be bad. Now, fortunately, we took some steps. We opened schools a little later and we gave teachers N95 masks. And in any event, I think I probably really overestimated that, and I was never happier to be wrong. But we still have the same hammer hanging over our head. We still have a whole population of kids under 5 who cannot be vaccinated. And if you are not vaccinated, you should be afraid of Omicron. It's really that simple. It's a very simple relationship. That's a big problem. And a lot of those kids either go to daycare or have older siblings who are at school, or of course, perhaps both. And so if we're going to take masks off at school, we're really going to propagate COVID through those kids, and it's going to end up in those younger kids, and we are going to see hospitalization. The upside here is that young child hospitalizations, the outcomes tend to be pretty good, but that's a pretty thin silver lining if that's what we say we're prepared to do to these kids.
And the phrase that keeps popping up is individual risk assessment. It feels almost like the province has said, you know what, we're done. You take care of this yourself. Look after yourself. Is that an overstatement?
No, I don't think so. I mean, there's obviously some explicit ideology. You know, a conservative government is always going to have values of individual responsibility, small government, individual resilience, those sorts of themes. And when times are good, perhaps there's something to be said for them. But when times are not, the problem is it can really, really be quite harmful. The idea that we can all assess our own risk really offends me because of the ways in which people have been misinformed. And let's remember, Ontario went to court to make sure that airborne transmission is not recognized in Ontario. So if the provincial government has its head so far in the sand that it will not acknowledge airborne transmission, and it will not embed that in policy, and will not consider unsafe work refusals based on that, we're in big trouble. So if the government has set the bar at irretrievable incompetence with respect to risk assessment, and then saying, great, now citizens, you can do it yourself too. That's terrible. What kinds of outcomes can we expect from that? It's going to be bad for a lot of people.
And I guess that's the danger, especially so close to an election, that politics is being thought of ahead of science.
I think we've imported some of that zeitgeist from the United States. I think science and politics have been in conflict ever since, well, perhaps arguably for decades or longer, but certainly it's really come to the fore when Mr. Trump became president. And I think that's kind of made its way up here as well. Not that we wanted it to, but that tends to be. Fashion tends to move northward. And so we're really dealing with that now. And it's pretty frustrating as a scientist. And, I teach at an information school. I'm teaching a misinformation course this term for the first time. So I do spend a lot of time thinking about that. And, the news for that class and the stuff we encounter and talk about, it's not good news. There's no easy way out.
I was going to say for that class, you may want to use the show that's right after mine. It's a font of misinformation. What can you tell me about BA2? I've started seeing that pop up as a bit of a warning. What do you know about that?
So it's a cousin of Omicron, so we consider it a subvariant of Omicron, or at least the virologists do, who do these classifications. And it's a little bit different than Omicron. It is a lot more contagious, which surprised me because Omicron, the original Omicron, is already enormously contagious. So this is really concerning because it's out competing old Omicron. That means that a lot of people who manage to avoid getting infected, by the skin of their teeth, this time around they're not going to be so lucky. So it's going to push cases up. Even if we kept masks on, BA2 would probably push cases up, or at least it would forestall what's been a general global decline. And that's obviously really concerning. So we're going to take masks off just as BA2 gets going, and that's going to put wind in its sails. We have, according to Dr. Moore, maybe 20,000 cases in Ontario per day. We could see that briefly, it's hard to say. I don't really know, but it could be well over 100,000 cases a day for a few days and then back down. And again, for many people, it's mild, but for some, it's going to be catastrophic. And I go right back to that age group of kids under 5 who we're supposed to protect. And I really think we're disabling our own ability to do that. And the timing is also not just because of the election, but kind of troubling because during March break, it's not unknown for a lot of families and kids to leave the country and visit other places that may have different variants or different caseloads and bring whatever
is there back to Ontario, and right after March break is when the masks come off.
Not to put too fine a point on it, but if I wanted to encourage as much infection in schools as possible, and I'm not suggesting that's the case here, but if I were in charge and that's what I wanted to do, I would pick the first day back after March break to have people take their masks off. That would be I think, the peak timing. And it's I'm still scratching my head wondering whether it's the first 3 days or maybe the beginning of the second week back after March break that might be the most dangerous, because whether masks are on or off, a fixed number of people are going to go and travel and hang out, and some fixed number of people will come back with COVID. So the question is, now that masks are off, how much spread then is going to happen in the classroom? That's been really hard to model, to be honest. We've been very data bereft, and COVID in kids, and the behavior has changed. The epidemiology has changed. So it's actually a pretty hard problem to try and quantify. But I think in broad terms, I can say we can expect a lot of COVID in schools in the next 2 weeks after March break. Hopefully not much longer than that, but I think it's going to be messy. It's going to be a dangerous time.
And already there's children's health advocates pushing back. I know the Children's Health Coalition put out a statement opposing this in a strong ways. Will that have any effect on the government?
I'm not sure the Children's Health Coalition really opposed it in a strong way, so much as said they really want people to be concerned and be sensitive about this. I thought they were being very diplomatic, and I guess I can understand why. But this is the group, and there's many others, that pushed so hard to open schools in January without asking for a single extra thing in terms of error remediation. And, as human beings, we're not going to wear masks forever. Of course not. And we're not going to have masks in schools forever. Of course not. But we've had a really long runway to fix indoor air and do it really properly and do it really well, and we haven't. So we had some leverage back in January to pressure the government, and that coalition, among others, said, never mind that, let's just open the schools. And so to me, they've got a bit of a moral obligation, I think, to step it up. I think I'd like to see more aggressive communication. They should be organizing protests. That's what they should be doing, because they really did let January.
Well, and the troubling thing, too, is I was talking with my previous guest, and we've talked about it over the weeks on this show. It's recently come to light that the Ford administration had $5 billion-ish that just sat idle. They didn't use it for anything. And I just think about how much of that money could be spent on HEPA filters and filtration and schools, businesses, wherever it's needed. But it just sat.
It did, and we've known this for a while. In that sort of it's $5 billion now. We thought it was, 4.4 for months and months. Where did this COVID money go? And it could have gone into a sustainable program of rapid testing. So instead, we warehoused them and then handed them out all at once in one big glut. And now, of course, they're hard to get, and there's just real chaos around doing that kind of surveillance. So we could have spent some money there. There's no question at all. Schools would be high in my list. Daycares would be so high in my list. Purchasing N95 masks for public servants who are exposed to the public. We've had a lot of COVID among TDC operators, for example, bus drivers in particular. They've got plexiglass, but of course plexiglass is not particularly useful for something that's airborne. So we've got so many infrastructure things we could be doing and should have been doing, and it's heartbreaking that we didn't. From daycares to schools to public transit to all kinds of workers who are in high-risk positions who honestly deserve better. We all do, and I feel really disappointed, really let down.
So now that we're sort of on our own, what steps can people take to protect themselves in this new world?
That's a really important question, and I only have one simple answer, which is an N95 mask or N99 or KN94, 95. They're made with the same kind of fabric that is really effective at trapping virions. And that is when you put one of those on, and I wear one, and I'm teaching in person now, I'm not so concerned over a period of a couple of hours. I'm not so concerned about what people are doing around me and what risk they might pose. I'm conscious of ventilation, so you want to be in places with good ventilation. You don't want to spend too many hours with the same people if they're unmasked. But if you're wearing an N95 mask, you should feel safe. But it has to fit well. And we also have to acknowledge that people who have comorbidities or other risk factors might be experiencing a great deal of anxiety about this. And to ask them to put their trust in a little white mask might be asking a lot. So I think we still really need to be sensitive. I don't want people to hear what I'm saying as put on an N95 and it doesn't matter. No, it still does. But this is the most important tool that individuals can use, and it does have to fit properly. But if you are able to manage that, then that would be that's the way forward. That's the way forward for individuals to be safe.
Excellent. I have N95s and I have such trouble with I have like a very sharp nose, so I try as much as possible to squeeze it in around the nose and mitigate any kind of airflow through there.
Well, if you have a second, I can say really briefly, the way to test an N95 mask is when you wrap that wire around your nose, get someone to watch you while you're wearing the mask, to watch your eyes, blow out as hard as you can as if you're trying to extinguish a birthday cake candle at infinite distance. And if you blink, if your observer can see you blink, that means there's air puffing out over the top of the mask. And so you want to get to the point where you can do that without blinking. And that tells you it fits.
I have glasses, so I can see it sometimes just through the fog. Hey, thank you so much for coming on and giving us some insight into how we should go forward with this. And hopefully, if I bring you on again, it's for more positive things. Knock on whatever this is. But keep doing the work you're doing, and I really appreciate you coming on here.
Better times ahead, and thank you so much for having me.
No worries. That is Dr. Colin Furness. He is an infection control epidemiologist and assistant professor at the Faculty of Information at U of T.
Weekday afternoons, 4 to 6. It's the Richard Serra Show.
I've always felt that we are governed by everyone I hated in high school. Not literally the same people, but the same types of people I hated in high school. You know the ones. They joined every club. They worked really hard at being popular. They were obsequious, really, and they ran for student council. They were very ambitious, but not particularly bright.
The Richard Serra Show. Weekday afternoons, 4 to 6. Newstalk. SAUGA960 AM.
Attention all dog lovers. Does your dog hate to be left alone? Have they developed separation anxiety? Well, bring them out. The Mississauga Steelheads will be hosting their annual Pucks and Paws game on Sunday, March 20th at 2 p.m., presented by Wren's Pets. That's right, you could bring your dog to a hockey game. If you haven't attended this event before, you won't want to miss out on all the vendors, giveaways, and more. Treat your dog to the ultimate experience. For more information, visit Ticketmaster.ca or contact the Steelheads representative at info@MississaugaSteelheads.com.
Imagine having over 100 TV multi-language channels at your fingertips. Imagine having over 100 multi-language radio stations at your fingertips. Now, imagine an app that lets you watch or listen to all of this amazing entertainment whenever or wherever you want. Now, imagine it's all free. eBaba is the reality in mobile entertainment. Download eBaba for iOS or Android. Turn imagination into reality at eBaba.
Stream us live at SAUGA960am.ca.
Talk that rocks. It's Josh Holiday Live. Need to be heard? Tell your phone to call 647-6-YO-JOSH.
Yeah. Winding down the show here. Yeah. ZZ Top. Just reading today, they are going to have a new album come out of what they're describing as more raw versions of some of their previous hits. I think a lot of it derived from the Netflix documentary on them. It is Josh Holiday Live. As I said, we're winding down, but if you can call us anytime you like, 647-6-YO-JOSH. Even if you're hearing this as a repeat, you're not hearing it on Friday, March 11th, or you're hearing it as a podcast, you can leave a message, you can text, whatever you want to do. That number is what you need. A reminder that this weekend, you're going to have an hour of your sleep, an hour of your life stolen in the middle of the night. Saturday night, you're going to go to bed, and around 2 a.m., someone's going to come in and steal a whole hour. Spring forward. You got to change your clock. Some tips for dealing with this change in sleep. It says, back your sleep schedule by 15 minutes every night leading up to the weekend. Well, it's a little late for that, so you don't get caught off guard by the time change. Make sleep a priority to avoid accumulated sleep debt. Get outside during the day, especially in the morning, to get your body clock in tune with its new rhythm. Keep your home dark at night once the sun sets to let your brain know it's time to sleep. Have some patience with yourself and your sleep partner. Oh, sleep partner, I can dream. Your body will find its rhythm, and avoid a temporary rift with your partner by understanding you both might be a little cranky. I remember seeing, I don't know if this is just wives' tales or legend, but that on the Monday after time changes, there's significantly more car accidents. I don't know if that's an actual fact or not, but I can imagine people being a little less alert, that type of thing. So March break is coming. I hope you enjoy it, and time change is happening this weekend, and hopefully we're going to get some warm weather after March break. This is Josh Holiday Live. There's many ways to get in touch with us if you have something to say about what you've heard on the show. On Twitter, it's at Josh Holiday, 2 L's in Holiday. You can email josh@joshholiday.com, 2 L's in Holiday. You can get past episodes of this show at joshholidaylive.com. And if you want all of this information in one easy place, you can visit the website SAUGA960am.ca and go to the show page, and you'll find the Instagram, the Twitter, I don't even know, YouTube might be up there, whatever. And if you want to get a podcast version of the show, just search on your favorite podcasting app for Josh Holiday Live, and if you're spelling holiday, 2 L's for that. And just in general, you can go to joshholiday.com, and even if you put in just 1 L, it'll still get you to the same place. You have yourself an excellent weekend, and we will see you here sometime next week. Well, not sometime, around this exact time next week.
Turn on the lights, open the shades.
The show's over, but the conversation continues. On Twitter at Josh Holiday, on the web at joshholidaylive.com, and hear missed episodes on your favorite podcatcher. Talk that rocks. Josh Holiday Live.
I hope it doesn't get lost.
Live from Toronto to the world. Josh Holiday Live. Talk that rocks.
The public needs to be informed.
Josh might. It touches. It touches all of these policies.
That is Carmya S'ad. She is a lawyer and a political activist. It is Josh Holiday Live. You can reach us at 6476-YO-JOSH. We are going to return in just...
Hi, this is a Greg Carrasco from Oakville, New York. Hi, this is a Greg Carrasco from Oakville Nissan in...
What? Dial 6476-YO-JOSH now to be heard.
And bye.
Something bugging you?
I was talking with my previous guest, and we've talked about it. So now that we're sort of on our own, what steps can people take to give information at U of T?
Weekday afternoons.
Talk that rocks. It's Josh